The Last Breath of the Ferdinand, a tale of steel, fury, and the fateful zenith. They called it the Iron Grave, the gargantuan German tank destroyer, the Ferdinand. Its 200mm frontal armor was a legend, its 88mm Pak 43/2L/71 cannon a harbinger of doom. Yet, in the searing dust of the Kursk salient in July 1943, even the greatest legend of steel and fire could meet an end not by a bullet, but by a plummeting, thunderous, and impossible stroke of fate. Part 1. The Steel Titan's Baptism. Chapter 1. The Weight of Steel. The heat inside the fighting compartment of Ferdinand 314 was a physical entity, a smothering blanket of pressed air, oil vapor, and the sour sweat of 6 men. Unteroffizier Klaus Richter, the radio operator, stared at the massive steel bulk of the casemate, the unyielding fortress around them. At 65 tons, the Ferdinand was a behemoth, a lumbering, nearly impenetrable monster designed by Ferdinand Porsche himself, hence the name. Klaus was 20, his face perpetually grimed with the black dust of the Eastern Front, his dreams haunted by the sight of Soviet T-34s burning. He belonged to the Schwer Panzerjäger Abteilung 653, the 653rd Heavy Tank Destroyer Battalion, the spearhead of Operation Citadel, the grand offensive meant to break the back of the Red Army once and for all. "Status check, Richter," snapped Oberlieutenant Kloss, the commander, his voice tight with anticipation. Kloss was an old-school tanker, a veteran of France and the initial sweep into Russia, but even he felt the pressure of this new, massive offensive. "Radio clear, Herr Oberlieutenant. We hold position at Sector 39 Bravo, waiting for the Pioneer lead." The Ferdinand's great flaw was its lack of a secondary machine gun. It was a sniper, a hunter designed for long-range kills, utterly reliant on accompanying infantry to deal with Soviet close assault teams. The massive, immobile hull, essentially a box of the thickest armor yet conceived, housed the deadliest anti-tank gun in the world. July 5, 1943. The offensive began not with a roar, but with a terrifying continuous thump as the Red Army's counter-barrage, forewarned by intelligence, slammed into the German start lines. The very earth trembled, and Klaus felt the vibrations through the soles of his heavy leather boots. The first days were a mixed triumph and tragedy for the 653rd. The Ferdinands moved forward, lumbering slowly through minefields that crippled their tracks and suspension. Their weight, their great strength, became their crippling weakness. Soviet anti-tank guns, firing from concealed positions, found their rounds useless against the frontal armor. The 88mm guns of the Ferdinands retaliated, striking the Soviet defenses from extreme range. Klaus recalled the words of the driver, the dour and unflappable Vogtfeldwebel Gross, as they watched a T-34's turret fly 50 feet in the air. "The Russians can throw all the iron they have at us. It means nothing. We are the shield of the Reich." Chapter 2. The Sky's Predator. Miles to the east, in the heart of the Soviet defenses, Kapitän Viktor Baronov squinted against the bright morning sun filtering through the canopy of this Petlikov Pe-2 twin-engine dive bomber. The Pawn, as the pilots affectionately called the Pe-2, was a versatile machine, fast and maneuverable, but it was not the purpose-built ground-attack terror that the legendary Il-2 Sturmovik was. Victor's mission, however, was no less vital: deep penetration bombing of high-value German assets, specifically the newly sighted, seemingly invulnerable heavy tank destroyers. It was a wall of steel, and the only hope was to hit the softer flanks, the fragile engine deck, or the tracks, or simply to drop something very heavy on its head. Victor, a veteran of Stalingrad, carried the heavy weight of that victory and the immense losses that accompanied it. His navigator, Starshий Lieutenant Irina Petrova, a woman whose calm demeanor belied a razor-sharp tactical mind, was currently calculating the final approach vector. Target coordinates confirmed, Victor. Sector 94 Zeta. High concentration of heavy German armor, the Panzerjägers. Irina's voice was calm, metallic through the headset. The Panzerjägers. Reports coming back from the front lines and the shattered anti-tank regiments had painted a picture of absolute horror. A new, massive German tank that nothing in the Soviet arsenal could reliably penetrate frontally. It was a wall of steel, and the only hope was to hit the softer flanks, the fragile engine deck, or the tracks, or simply to drop something very heavy on its head.
We dive at 3,000 meters. Prepare the bomb run. Single high-explosive delayed fuse drop. We go in hard and get out fast, my friends, Victor announced to his crew. His gunner, a nervous but dependable young man named Semyon, acknowledged from the tail position. The Pe-2 was carrying a heavier than standard load, prioritizing a single, massive high-explosive bomb, a 1,000-kilogram general-purpose behemoth meant for bunkers and bridges, now repurposed for the ultimate steel target. It was a shot in the dark, a desperate measure that relied on perfect aiming, a swift, brutal dive, and the unpredictable physics of war. Chapter 3. The Interception. The relentless advance of the 653rd Battalion was grinding to a halt. The Ferdinand 314 was a mile deep into the first defensive belt, its crew tallying 5 T-34 kills and 2 anti-tank gun batteries silenced. But the vehicle was wounded. A hidden mine had shattered the right track, and the sheer weight of the Ferdinand meant recovery was impossible under fire. "The track is severed, Herr Oberleutnant," shouted Gross, fighting the controls, the great machine yawing uselessly. Klaus cursed, pounding his fist on the armored wall. "Richter, call HQ. We are immobile. We will continue to provide fire support until we are told or until we are ordered to scuttle. Tell them we are at position 39 Bravo, pinned down by mortars and intermittent anti-tank fire." Klaus relayed the message. A wave of dread washed over him. An immobile Ferdinand was a magnet for infantry, or worse, the Soviet flying tanks, the Stormoviks. The air above the salient had become a relentless meat grinder, a perpetual buzzing horror. As Klaus waited for a response, the sound changed. It was not the familiar thump of artillery or the high-pitched shriek of an incoming round. It was a deep guttural roar, growing rapidly, tearing through the thin, dusty air. Aircraft. But it was not the familiar, slow growl of the IL-2. This was faster, a higher-pitched twin-engine drone descending in a high-speed dive. "Aircraft! Fast! Dive bomber!" Klaus screamed, shoving his head out of the hatch for a precious, fatal second of vision. Viktor Baranov's Pe-2 was a black speck against the sky, hurtling towards its target. The massive, stationary 314, a great black silhouette framed against the green fields, was a perfect bullseye. Irina, her eye glued to the bomb site, called out the final corrections. "Mark! Mark! Drop!" The 1,000-kilogram bomb detached, a black cylinder plummeting from the belly of the Pe-2. Victor immediately wrenched the yoke, pulling his aircraft out of the dive in a gut-wrenching high-G maneuver, Semyon already firing his dorsal machine gun at the receding ground below. Inside the Ferdinand, Klaus heard the scream of the bomb, the sound that instantly separates the living from the dead as it reached terminal velocity. There was no time to speak, no time to pray, only the primordial reflex of bracing. It was an impossible hit. The bomb struck the exact center of the Ferdinand's massive engine deck, The thinner armored plating above the two Maybach engines, a target only a hair's breadth wider than the bomb itself. The world ceased to be steel and fire. It became pure concussion. The high explosive charge detonated, not with a simple bang, but with a concussive shockwave that peeled the deck plating like a tin lid. The delayed fuse did its work, driving the bomb's force deep. The explosion ignited the fuel tanks and, more crucially, the immense store of 88mm ammunition. Klaus' less perception was the sight of the heavy transmission housing tearing loose from its mountings, flying through the fighting compartment as an internal shrapnel star. The secondary detonation of the main charges created a pressure cooker that tore the 65-ton behemoth apart from the inside. The legendary armor that had defied Soviet shells was no match for the hammer blow from above. The iron grave Ferdinand 314 ceased to be a fighting vehicle. It became a wreck, a black, smoking testament to the fragile nature of even the most powerful war machine. Part 2. The Aftermath and the Legend. Chapter 4. The Scout and the Turning Tide. Major General Clement Yeremenko of the Red Army's Deep Penetration Intelligence stood at the lip of a hastily dug trench, binoculars pressed to his eyes. He was watching the smoke rise from Sector 39 Bravo. Yeremenko was the kind of man who understood that victory was not just about tanks and guns, but about the flow of information. It was his network, Lucy, that had delivered the full detail of Operation Citadel to Moscow, giving the Red Army the critical weeks needed to build their layered defenses. He was waiting for his forward scouts. The Germans had sent their iron graves against the Soviet lines, and they were succeeding, but at a terrible cost to the German momentum. The sheer volume of destruction was staggering. The ground was littered with shattered tanks and the mangled remains of both armies. A scout, a grizzled starshina, scrambled up to the trench. "Comrade General, we have confirmed the kill at 39 Bravo. It is one of the new Panzerjägers, a Ferdinand, completely destroyed. Internal detonation." "Anti-tank round?" Yeremenko asked, his voice low. "No, Comrade General. The damage is from above. The scout that got the closest reports the engine deck is peeled back. A direct hit, a massive one." Yeremenko nodded slowly. A direct, high-caliber bomb hit on a moving or briefly stationary armored target was the stuff of legend, a 1 in 1,000 shot, but it had happened. A single, perfectly placed bomb from a Pe-2 had done what scores of anti-tank guns could not. "Was the aircraft identified?" asked Yeremenko. "Pe-2, Comrade General, Squadron 8, Capitan Baranov's wing. It's already being reported as the perfect strike." Yeremenko smiled, a tired, knowing smile. He understood the psychological value of this kill. The myth of German invulnerability was the backbone of their advance. A tank destroyer that was supposed to be impossible to destroy had been annihilated from the sky by the simple, brutal arithmetic of gravity and high explosives. Send the full report to the Stavka. Focus on the method of destruction. The propaganda value is immense. We must show the troops that even the iron grave can be turned into a coffin. And find Capitan Baranov. He has earned a medal and a drink.
Chapter 5. The Pilot's Burden. Viktor Baranov landed his Pe-2 pawn at the forward airfield, the tires screeching on the uneven dirt strip. The mission was a success, but the weight of the moment lay heavy on him. He felt exhilarated by the precision of the dive, but also hollowed out by the sheer violence of the explosion he'd witnessed. Irina and Semyon disembarked, their faces pale but triumphant. That was not a tank," Semyon said, wiping a streak of oil from his forehead. "That was a fortress, and we smashed it." Viktor walked around the plane, inspecting the twin tail sections. "We hit the engine deck, a weak point, but impossible to hit. We were lucky, my friends, incredibly lucky. He knew it was more than luck. It was Irina's precise calculation, his years of training, and a critical vulnerability in the German design. The large, flat engine deck, designed for easy maintenance, now the target of the gods of war. Later that evening, after the high fives and the reports, Victor found himself alone, drinking watered-down vodka. He kept seeing the flash, the perfect fiery column of smoke rising from the wreck. He had not just destroyed a machine, he had ended the world for 6 young men on the ground. He was the instrument of an impossible victory, a single point of precision in a sea of brutal, indiscriminate chaos. The knowledge did not bring glory, it brought a profound metallic melancholy. He thought of the intelligence officer who would turn this single brutal fact into a rallying cry for the entire front. The war was turning, and the death of that one massive tank, the iron grave of the 653rd Battalion, was not just a kill, it was a psychological inflection point. Chapter 6. The Legend is Forged. The Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history, ground on. The German offensive faltered, drowned in the Red Army's carefully layered defenses and the sheer brutal resilience of the Soviet people. The Ferdinands continued to inflict heavy losses, but their momentum was lost. Their great weight and mechanical unreliability meant that disabled vehicles, like Klaus Richter's 314, often had to be abandoned and destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture, further bolstering the Soviet claims of their destruction. The story of Ferdinand 314, the invincible German monster killed by the direct hit of a Pe-2 dive bomber, spread like wildfire through the Soviet lines. It was embellished, magnified, and mythologized. It became the symbol of the Soviet Red Army's superior will and the ultimate vulnerability of even the most powerful Nazi technology. The propaganda machine seized on the kill, ensuring that every soldier, from the infantryman in the trench to the commissar in Moscow, knew that the German iron grave was no match for the Soviet pawn from the sky. The loss of Ferdinand 314 was not just a casualty report for the 653rd Battalion, it was a visible monument to the failure of the initial offensive. The Germans had bet on a lightning strike, on the invulnerability of their new weapons. But the Soviets, forewarned and prepared, had met their technical superiority with strategic depth and an almost impossible, lucky precision. In the long retreat from Kursk, the remaining Ferdinands, later renamed Elefant, would continue to be formidable, claiming hundreds of Soviet kills. But the high watermark of German armored offensive capability had passed. The defeat at Kursk marked the beginning of the end of the German effort on the Eastern Front. The burnt-out, shattered wreck of Ferdinand 314, its thick armor peeled back like burnt paper, would remain on the Russian steppe, a monument to a single moment of impossible fortune, a legend woven by smoke, steel, and a perfectly aimed bomb.